each one of you. It's a pleasure to be with you today. If I can have the PowerPoint, please. But just to say that my focus, I think of the three of us, I have got the easiest job this morning, because my role this morning is simply to share the experience of the Synod itself. And then Tesfai will speak about the content that is emerging, and Mark will speak to the challenges that poses for us in missionary religious life. Excuse me. Okay, so for me, it's impossible to speak about the experience of the Synod itself without mentioning the lead up to the Synod. This Synod session of 2023 is part of a process that began in October 2021. And if I remember correctly, both myself and Tesfai were at that opening session in October 2021 in the Synod Hall. And then from October 2021 until around April of this year, much work was done right across the globe in the Universal Church to listen to what people are saying about our life as Christians, our life in the church. The process began locally in the diocesan levels, also then to national level, and finally at continental level. So we came to the Synod 2023, the first of two sessions, having participated in and listened to many of the faithful. In our particular case, as UISG and USG, we had our own joint process where we invited the membership to reflect on the questions, after which the fruits of the reflection were submitted to the Synod office. Before beginning, I meant to recognize the presence of Sister Maria Simperman with us. Maria was actually one of the 4 people who did the synthesis of all the responses from around the world for religious life. And Maria now is here at UISG to guide UISG on the synodal journey into the future, picking up on the fruits of the Synod to see how we can deepen our commitment to synodality. And Maria was one of the facilitators also during the Synod 2023. So sorry. Just beside her is Miriam, who is here taking photographs, I think, from the communications office here also. Okay. So as at the Synod, it was really interesting to listen to the experiences from around the world gathered in Rome. Often at the tables, at least at the tables where I participated, we heard echoes about poor participation around the world. And I often heard it said that there was 1% of the faithful participated. But in fact, in listening to different experiences from around the world, it was not true in all places. Some places, yes, there was a very small participation, but in many churches around the world, it was heartening to listen to bishops, to lay people from these parts of the world, who shared the enthusiastic participation of the vast majority of the faithful in their countries. And also that the synodality is already bearing fruit for them in their churches. The Synod Secretariat made great efforts to ensure everyone was prepared for this Synod. They organized online meetings by continent for all the participants, and they also had a meeting for UISG and USG representatives. We had an online meeting, and this preparation was very important. They answered our questions, explained a little of how the organization would be, and helped us to prepare spiritually and concretely for the event. We also selected the themes that we would like to work on. As you know, for each of the themes, communion, participation, and mission, there were 5 questions under each theme. So each participant worked on one in each category, and we chose that beforehand, and the table groups were formed according to that. And that helped us also to prepare we all had 4 minutes presentation to give at our table. So this preparation beforehand helped us to be ready for all of that. Someone recounted at the beginning of the Synod to me that Pope Francis was putting people to the test, asking them, when did the Synod begin? And he was very happy if the answer was correct, because it wasn't simply the work done between October the 4th and the 28th that was part of the Synod, but it began with the ecumenical prayer, continued then with the retreat in Sacrofano, and then we settled into the work of the Synod itself, the 5 different modules from the 4th to the 28th. Thank you. Some very important moments for us during the Synod. The opening prayer, as I've already mentioned. That ecumenical moment that was really powerful and stayed with us throughout the month. We also had the prayer for migrants, and a visit to the catacombs. And we also had the Rosary for Peace. So with that as an introduction, how would I describe the experience? And I would say this is very personal. This is my experience of the Synod. I think every participant would share it a little differently. But I would like to speak along 4 points. The first was that it was a deep spiritual journey in a sacred space, that it was a place of respectful encounters where new connections and friendships grow. It was an exciting but an exhausting experience. And finally then, it was a new space for women. So let me begin at the beginning. A deep spiritual journey in a sacred space. The prayer moments of the Synod were all streamed live, so I'm sure many of you were able to follow them online. The retreat time in Sacrofano was a very profound introduction to all of us, for all that was needed if we were to engage with each other and be guided by the Holy Spirit during this Synod. From the get-go, we were invited to imagine what it was like that everyone is listening from their different perspectives. There are people with very different perspectives, and Jesus is as close to the person with the other perspective as he is to me. So everyone was sitting around Jesus with all our different perspectives. I think that was a real invitation at the beginning to help us to open up to the differences and to the other perspectives. Being together in that humble space really helped us to begin to build bridges, to break down walls. The time we shared together in Sacrofano, it was a real foundation for the entire month. We were, as somebody said, we were together for the prayer, but we were also together for all the meals. Someone commented at the beginning that going to Sacrofano, going to the dining room where there were 360 people was an actual nightmare for introverts, because you had to look for a table that spoke your language, that you would be able to engage with. But that all changed when Timothy Radcliffe spoke about friendship, about the call to friendship. And from that moment, everyone made an extra effort just to be inviting and to break down that fear. I mentioned earlier that the opening of the Synod process in October 2021 took place in the traditional hall. I'm sure you've seen the pictures and you've heard the stories. It's like a large lecture theatre, and the seating arrangement's very traditional. And I remember very clearly as we entered this hall on that morning, we were told to sit anywhere except the first 7 rows. And I remember somebody saying to me, I hope they are not reserved for cardinals, because if that is so, then it's not a good start for synodality. And in fact, if you look at the picture closely, that's what it was. The first 7 rows were the important people, and then the rest of us filed in later. Fast forward now to this experience. I'm sure you've also seen the pictures. The wide, expansive space of Paul VI Hall, with around 40 round tables spread around the hall, with 12 people at each table. And in no particular order, we had lay people, religious, bishops, cardinals, archbishops. And as we began our retreat in Sacrofano, and often around the tables, we were asked how we liked to be addressed, to move away from the titles. And most people were happy to be addressed by their first name. So it was a very informal time together, but very respectful. There were great efforts to create a prayerful and discerning atmosphere. The listening was really profound. And of equal importance were the prayerful moments of silence. We had a lot of moments of silence throughout the month. At the table sharing, after everyone presented their 4 minutes, we had a time of silent reflection to get in touch with what was moving within us in response to what was shared. This was repeated after every round, which made it relatively simple for us all to note the divergences and the convergences, the questions that were arising, and the different proposals. Just to give you a little flavor of our prayer, this sound now. There were profound moments of silence also when we were doing the feedback in the General Assemblies. After every 4 speakers, which were 3-minute reports from each table, there were 4 minutes of silence. Again, this helped us to go deeper in the listening and in getting in touch with what was moving within. We really all learned the importance of deep listening. And true listening is transformative. I think it's safe to say that everyone in that hall was transformed. I personally, I know that I've been changed by the process of being there for the month. We could sense it in each other, and then some people freely shared how they had been transformed by the month together. It was really profound. The other prayer experiences were also deeply significant. The pilgrimage to the catacombs, where we were given the text of the Pact of the Catacombs, which was made by about 40 bishops towards the end of Vatican II. That was shared with us. We were invited to pray with it. And it could have been written for us today. We still need to go back to that Pact of the Catacombs. It's certainly worth pondering. It invites us to really journey synodally as a church. The prayer for migrants was actually very stark, very moving. And it was a real reminder to us. It was there at the monument of Angels Unawares. And it was a real reminder to us of the focus of a synodal missionary church. Of course, we had many prayers for peace also throughout the month. We were very aware of what was happening in the world. And regardless of the tiredness, the fatigue that we felt, I can honestly say I never got tired of walking into that synod hall every morning. It was a real privilege to be part of it. I wasn't sorry it was over, but it was still a privilege every morning to go there. A place of respectful encounters and new friendships. Sorry, let me just find my... We had the whole world in that room. There were people from practically every country in the world. So you can imagine with all those different voices, the voices from the different Christian churches also. We had our fraternal delegates. There were many different opinions on the diverse subjects that we were addressing. We also had delegates from countries that were at war with each other. We were very aware of what was happening in the world. But the methodology that we were using enabled us to share very deeply, share all those different opinions, and hold the tension very respectfully. What was amazing, I think, was that the points of convergence by far outweighed the divergences. There were some very powerful and moving interventions and discussions. I remember in particular the day we were working on the question of women in the church, particularly on the urgency of including women in roles of responsibility, leadership, and governance, of allowing the giftedness of women to influence and guide the church. The level of convergence on this issue was remarkable. It was really strong and palpable in the room. And one bishop sitting at my table, he remarked to me, "This is really a powerful moment." What a discussion on the question of women in the church. It was really powerful. So it was very moving. The manner in which the synod was organized invited us into friendships. Of course, you have already heard a lot about the round tables and the sharing at the tables, but this did facilitate a growing and getting to know each other. We were introduced to the conversation in the Spirit methodology when we went to Sacrofano for the retreat. We already began using this methodology. And the group we shared with during the retreat became what I call our base group. We began the first module, the section A, with more or less that same group that we were on retreat with. So we already knew each other a little bit. And then for the next 3 modules, which was communion, participation, and mission, we moved to different tables. We met different groups of people. And then we finally came back again to our base group for the last week, where we were working on the document. That's how it was organized. Of course, most of us were working within our own language group, which limited a little bit the connections we had with other languages, but we did our best to mix beyond the linguistic barriers also. It was an amazing experience, really, to be around the table with people from all parts of the world. Quite often there were representatives from all continents. My base table, as you can see, and they were dressed up because it was the last day. We took our photograph on the very last day. Usually the bishops and archbishops and cardinals didn't have to dress like that. But my table we had from Hong Kong, from the Philippines, from Korea, India, also from Oceania, North America, and Europe. We had an African as our facilitator, and we had an Armenian ecumenical delegate. So just to give you a flavor of how the tables looked. Of course, we had moments of very special encounters. You can imagine who I'm talking about. Another particularly special encounter in that Synod Hall was the possibility of greeting Pope Francis. He attended most of the general congregations, those for opening each module, and often those for listening to the feedback from the table discussions. Any day he was attending, he came to the hall very early, at least 45 minutes before we started, to give people an opportunity to go and greet him, take photos, say what we wanted to say. So I began to take it for granted that every few days I could go and greet Pope Francis, shake his hand, and share a joke. And he does have a great sense of humor. Now I want to share an experience that I had that he found very amusing. It was the first day that we were giving feedback from the small group discussions. And each table had to elect the person that would give the feedback. So my table elected me. But right beside me at my table, there was Bishop Barron from the US. So of course, when the Secretariat saw the name Barron, they knew Bishop Barron, they didn't know me. So the name that came up for the feedback was Bishop Barron. But my table said, no, you must give the feedback. So when the name was called, I started giving the feedback. But the name that came up was Bishop Barron. So this was very amusing. And I simply said, just to clarify, I'm not Bishop Barron, that I'm the other Barron in the room. But everyone, I think, found it very amusing because of the image. And one bishop came to me afterwards and said, it was looking like the future of the church. But in fact, for a few days afterwards, when I would go to greet the Pope, he would say, Excellence, ciao, Bishop Barron. So he really does have a great sense of humor. So now, then my third point is that it's an exciting and an exhausting experience, which it was. I think we can all agree. Because of the nature of the Synod, because of the methodology being used, because of the physical setup, there was a real sense that this was an historic moment for our church and beyond. And it was really exciting to be part of that history. It was exciting to be at the table, sometimes as the only woman at the table. Most times there were two, but sometimes I was alone for one module. But it was exciting to be there, voicing a different perspective and knowing that that was being listened to and was being heard. The process, we had our table discussions. There were 37 tables discussing, and we had our feedback then from each table. But there was also possibility of personal interventions. Once we ended the table discussion, people could respond also, and they would be given 3 minutes to speak. But you had to be very strategic, because we were 400 plus, we were 365 voting members, but there were special invitees, there were fraternal delegates, so we were over 400 people who desired to speak. So we were warned from the beginning that in these free interventions, as they were called, priority would be given to those who had never spoken before. So if you spoke on the first day, it was unlikely you were going to speak again. So there was a sense of the need to be strategic in when you would speak. What do you really want to say to the synod that maybe hasn't been said before? And holding for the moment that you would share that. This was very different to previous synods, and I think it wasn't fully appreciated by some of the participants. Personally also, I think it was amazing how easy it was to find our voice. And I think it was the round tables, that getting to know each other deeper, it was actually easy to share, even when what I was saying was extremely different to what others maybe wanted to hear. And I think that one of my own sisters actually sent me a text telling me not to be afraid to speak. So I could honestly say I had no fear walking into that hall and sitting around the tables. There was no fear of voicing what needed to be voiced. I think the Spirit was really with us in all of that. There were some great pearls of wisdom shared, and this is the one that I sit with, that will stay with me, probably because I'm a congregational leader. I was very touched by the sharing of one cardinal. We were talking about authority and responsibility and the need to listen, to really listen to people. And he said, this is his quote, I told him I'd be quoting him, so. He said, "It is neither healthy nor holy to submit to the will of one who does not listen." I think it's a real call to all leaders to really listen deeply. I was also very touched by the sharing of the ecumenical delegates. It was really enriching to have all the different Christian churches in that room. And some of them referred to their participation as a type of spiritual homecoming. Being at that synod was like a homecoming for them. I think that was really powerful for me anyway. As I said, it was also an exhausting month. The timetable was full. The days were very long, even though we had a very long siesta, but some of us were living far away and didn't go home for siesta. To listen at that level of intensity for that length of time is exhausting. It really was. And I think, I was lucky. I was doing it in English. There's no major challenge for me language-wise, but most of the people at my table, English was not their first language. It might have been their third language. So it was really tiring for many, many people. So let me go. My brothers will forgive me for this last point, but I think it's important. I think this synod was, Alan is forgiving me anyway. So. It really was a special moment for women, this experience of this synod. It's not the first time that women have attended the synod, but it is the first time that there has been a woman as a secretary in the synod secretariat, Sister Natalie, who we were very proud of. It was also the first time that during the sessions there were women presiding at the synod. We had 2 female president delegates. This is Sister from Mexico, and we had a lay woman from Japan was the other female delegate. It was the first time that women voted at this synod, and there were 54 women voting. But as well as the women who were voting, there were over 90 women there contributing in various roles. We had theologians there, we had our facilitators, we had many assisting in different ways. So this is just a little, we tried to get a group with all the women with the Pope, but we didn't get everybody, but that's a good number. So let me end this sharing of the experience with a tribute to the women at the Synod. It's a lovely little video put together by Future Church, which captures also the experience of the Synod from many, many different perspectives. So let me share that with you.